All right, today we're gonna pick out the right lighting options for a whole bunch of different applications. There's actually 4 major different types of lighting out there, and some of them do way better at very specific applications than others, and some do terrible. So we're actually gonna find out what those are today to help you guys pick out the right tool for the right job the first time for your tank.
Yeah, so we're narrowing down all of these choices based on those 4 lighting types of categories, but we're also gonna help you think of other considerations like wattage, and is that important, or mounting options, or aesthetic appeal, and shimmer, and all these other things. By the end of it, you'll have your lighting option narrowed down for your reef tank.
All right, so what are those 4 major categories of lighting? Well, the first one is a wide angle floodlight, kind of like the Kessil or the XR15 from Radions.
Yeah, and then there's elevated lighting, or lighting that's intended to be mounted higher up, and that's like your Hydra 32 or your Orphic.
And there's also soft diffused lighting, which is probably most commonly known as these really large form factor T5s. But even more commonly now is like a bunch of strips or a big grid of LEDs as well.
Yeah, and then last, that 4th category is hybrid lighting. So we're talking T5 LED combos, like your Aquatic Life T5 plus the LED of your choice, but also like LED grids, like a whole bunch of these AI primes.
So starting with those wide angle flood lamps, which includes lights like the A360 from Kessil, as well as the Radion lines, especially that XR15.
Yep.
This is a fairly small form factor light. This light is only about an inch big. However, it has like a 160-degree angle lens on it, which shoots it over a very wide area at a really low mounting height. So floodlight, meaning it floods an area with a lot of light at a really wide angle.
Yeah, so, and that's what we see in our Investigates tests and stuff, is that these lights, these wide angle floodlights do really well at a lower mounting height. They spread like in a 24-inch by 24-inch area. You get this even coverage from edge to edge because these things are so good at spreading that light out from a small light form factor.
I'll say also, like, pro tip here is one of the things they do specifically well is a high contrast image.
Oh yeah.
So from the photography or video world, high contrast means some areas of the tank or image are lighter or darker than others. There's intentional shadows to create that sense of depth and like visual appeal when you look at an image. So this small form factor light will be shadowed by some of the aquascape and create really dark areas within the caves, and it won't evenly illuminate everything like just a blanket of light. Make it visually really interesting, but it is specifically because of that really great for some corals.
Yeah, so this is a really good type of light, this wide angle floodlight, for those encrusting type corals, your Montes that grow over the rocks, or your Zoa gardens that spread out, or even those Euphilia that wave back and forth and don't need a whole bunch of light straight down on one point. But I mean, it does create that dark and light contrast, and it just really looks good in the tank.
Yeah, so encrusting corals, number 1, does really well. However, also, because it is a wide angle floodlight, you can also mount multiples together. So where they start to intersect. So if you have multiple XR15s or multiple of the A360 here, all of a sudden it starts to behave like a larger light because there's so many of them. So one of the cool parts about it, however, is that it's a super small form factor. It makes it super easy to mount. It makes it mounting arm works. I can just get it right on the tank without a lot of thought. I don't have to hang it from the ceiling or anything elaborate, which is pretty attractive to a lot of people. So these larger, or these flood lamps are actually one of the coolest ways to get a tank up and running. High contrast image, really great with encrusting corals that don't branch out, and easy to mount. A next option is actually really close to the last one, except for it's designed to be mounted higher.
Yeah, so these are the elevated lighting options. So basically, instead of that wide angle floodlight that has maybe 130 degree or 160 degree or wider angle, these are more narrow. So maybe even 90 degrees, some cases 55 degrees narrow angle, meaning that to get that same spread and coverage that we did with the wide angle floodlight, we just mount it higher.
Yeah, so if you're looking for a 14-inch mounting height because your hood is asking for that, that's where I'm going to put the lights. Well, if I had something optimized for 8 inches, like that wide angle floodlight, I'm just going to get a ton of spill into the room, or it's going to be bouncing around in my hood, wasting all that light. Much better if I know it's 12 to 14 inches, something like the Hydra here is a way, way better bet because it's designed for that. And again, it's the same amount of light, except for being at 130 inches, it might be at 90, which means if I raise it up 14 inches instead of 8, it's actually cover the exact same area, but the lens is optimized to the way that you use the light. So look at the mounting height, these wide angle floodlights like the Radions and the Kessils, usually close to 8 to 9 inches, but some of the elevated options higher. And then even higher than that is the Orphic.
Yeah, so a lot of people will use, a lot of reefers will use these elevated types of lighting for a couple of reasons. One is access to the tank. With a light mounted, 16 to 18 inches, like the Orphic can, some people mount upwards of 18 inches, I have an unobstructed access to my tank. I can fit my whole body between my light and my tank. So I don't have to worry about moving my lights or getting them out of the way. I can do all the work I need to while it's up there. But in that same breath, you can run the option, or you can use the option of lowering these lights lower than their recommended, or the recommended height that we found. And what that does is, although you won't get as much spread or even coverage, and you'll probably create a hot spot, if you have those deep, hard to light at the bottom tanks and you want light down, penetrating down to the depths, that punch from the narrow angle can get you down there.
You can actually see it in many cases. You can watch our investigates and see the actual optimized height and the angle, but in most cases, you can actually just look at the light and kind of see the lenses that are designed for that. So probably the most two popular options for an elevated light would be that 12 to 14 inches for the Hydra line, as well as the Orphic, which really pushes up into that 16 to 18 inch range. And then you can really get the right tool for the right job, designed on where you're going to mount the lights. All right, the number 3 category, soft diffused lighting. This is your SPS tank, but really anything branching. Anything where the corals are going to shadow its neighbor, or it's going to shadow itself as the colony grows larger. So a lot of times these SPS tanks will work just fine as long as the corals are about 1 inch or just a few inch colony. But once they get big, they start shadowing itself, inner workings of itself, as well as its neighbor, all of a sudden things go south. The solution to that is soft diffused lighting.
Yeah, and when we talk about soft diffused lighting, it's not just a diffuser on a small light. We're talking a large soft diffused area, meaning typically the fixture or that you're using is larger than the object you're trying to illuminate. And say if I have a 24-inch tank, we're not talking about illuminating the entire 24-inch by 24-inch area, but inside of that, you're trying to encapsulate the coral from all angles with light, and that's usually done with like your T5s, a bank of T5s, or even some things like these LED strips that are the same form factor as like these T5s.
So the reason we use the word soft in here is because in the photography and video world, and really any lighting application, the word soft means we've eliminated the shadows.
Yes.
And really the only way to eliminate the shadows is to make sure that the light source is larger than the object you're trying to illuminate.
Yeah.
And so in this case, not larger than the aquarium, because you're not trying to illuminate the glass. It's actually the aquascape and corals inside. So if your object that you're using to light the tank is bigger than the corals and aquascape, being a T5 fixture,
no shadows.
Mission accomplished.
Yeah, less shadows.
You're gonna wrap that coral in light, the shadows are gonna go away, and the health of the tank is gonna go up. Specifically, if you're trying to build that wall-to-wall SPS colony tank.
Again, there's a few options that achieve this large soft diffused lighting, specifically the old tried and true T5 bulb, T5 combos, multiple points of light here that you can use to blanket the corals in light. It's been successful in tanks for years. Right behind that, we just recently have tested these LED strips and using multiples of them as a single fixture that not only give you shimmer that the T5s don't, but also come with a little bit more control, like some dimmability and things like that, all in all being sometimes better in the distribution of light than a T5.
In fact, this one we actually found to be better.
Yeah.
One of the cool things about this is we used to think of these LED strips as supplemental lighting. I would add on to something else, but it became very obvious that just like the T5 bulbs, you can use the LED strips to combine together to produce that same type of effect where I'm blanketing the entire tank in light. But another option outside of that is actually done in panels. So you saw it in the Philips light, and there'll probably be others in the future, but they're just panel lights that have a grid of LEDs, not quite as big as these, not covering the entire tank, but somewhere in between that kind of soft flood lamp, or the flood lamp, and the soft diffuse lighting right in the middle. So you still have some of the benefits of each, but in a panel type lighting and LEDs, which are controllable and configurable. All right, number 4, my favorite, hybrid lighting. This is bringing the value of different lighting technologies or approaches together to create something uniquely well that you couldn't do independently.
Yeah, so we're talking mostly the combination of a wide angle floodlight and a little bit of these large soft diffuse lighting, which we've been doing for years in the aquarium hobby. Mostly it was metal halides coupled with supplemental T5s to get that fill light, get that shimmer, get the contrast, and everything we loved about the metal halides on its own and we loved about the T5s on their own combined together. But now we're using newer technology to achieve the same thing.
Yeah, so again, the halide there was that tiny little form factor.
Yeah.
If you looked at that little bulb inside the bulb, it was a little tiny guy about that big, and it was providing that wide angle floodlight, and then we filled it in with the T5s.
Yeah.
So now we're doing the exact same thing. So you can take your little Kessil light and it will have the same kind of punch as your 250 watt halide, except for in a smaller form factor without all the heat. And now I can just put it in the middle of a fill light and I get the benefit of both. I get that contrasty feel, I get the shimmer, and then I get the fill light that removes the shadows, and now I can grow any coral that I want, and it looks really sharp in the tank with that diffused, softer look, as well as the little contrasty feel.
So we're saying newer technology. So, it's this with T5s. It's kind of like that go-to for what I consider hybrid. When I hear hybrid lighting, I'm thinking wide angle floodlight plus some T5s, but we're actually finding that you don't have to use T5s to supplement. You can actually use LEDs to supplement your LEDs.
So that sounds crazy, LED hybrid, LED hybrid, sounds kind of crazy, right? But it's not.
Yep.
It is a wide angle flood lamp, hybridized with some fill light or that soft diffuse light. So you're starting to see a lot more options where I'm going to use something like this to provide that shimmer, that contrast, and then instead of T5s, use the LED bars to provide that fill light. Now I got no bulb changes, I don't have some of the heat that comes with it, and again I get all that controllability and ability to render out the color that I'm looking for, and has all the advantages of LED, but it's not LED hybrid like that.
Yeah.
It's actually, again, that flood lamp filled in with fill light to create the desired effect.
And so now we go on to the third option of these hybrid type lightings. We have, supplemental LEDs with T5s or LEDs with LEDs, but even in that same breath, we can kind of create that intermediate large soft diffuse light with a whole bunch of small form factor LEDs like this one.
So there's 2 options here, and listen up because this is pretty common done these days. It is the AI prime. So I can take a bunch of AI primes and say 6 of them over a 120 gallon tank. And now what I still have again is that shimmer, that contrasty feel, but there's so many overlapping cones of light that I've essentially created a soft diffuse light by just separating out multiple sources. So you could do 6, you could do 8, but again, you're getting all that intersecting light. And not just in a line, you can actually have rows of them to create that contrasty feel. Also, this is what most people do with the radions and the hydras now as well.
Yeah.
You separate them out over the tank.
Yeah, so you could take that same 120 gallon tank and you could use an XR30, 2 of them, and essentially cover the entire tank for what you need visually. But when it comes down for the same price, I can split those XR30s in half and get 4 XR15s and achieve the same thing that we're doing with these AIs, is spreading out the light, increasing the intersection points, and essentially creating a larger, softer, diffused light.
So yeah, I think a lot of people wouldn't think about this necessarily as a hybrid type of lighting.
It definitely is.
But when you combine a bunch of lights together, have all those overlapping cones of light, you are creating a soft diffused light, but you're doing it with multiple light sources. All right, so those are the 4 major categories of lighting and how to use them and what you're gonna get out of it. But there's some other considerations, starting with how powerful of a light do I need, because the more power or wattage you get, the the more expensive they get as well. So which one's right for you? There are like about 4 categories of this. Maybe that 50 to 60 watt range, maybe the 90-ish watt range, and around 150.
Yeah, so starting with the 55 watt range, one of the most popular examples is this AI Prime at about 55 watts, and there's other lights in that range too. Now, but when I consider this light, my expectations should be what a 50 watt light does. It's not as powerful as a 200, so I can't expect the same thing from it, but I can expect it to be a great light for a smaller tank or those lighter corals, the LPS and softies, those low par demand corals or lower to medium par demand corals. This turns into a great light for that type of option.
I will tell you, the Prime is actually the #1 light that you guys are picking up here. By far the most popular light. And I think there's a couple of reasons for it. One is it's a great entry level light.
Oh yeah.
For 2 reasons. One, for like a 40 breeder, I probably only need 2 of these. For even the E170, we found that you only needed 1 of them. So common smaller form factor lights, you can actually get away with a fairly inexpensive light. But this light also grows with you. Is part of the reason I think it's so popular is because now I got a 120. Well, what if I want the same type of tank but bigger? Well, now I can just add 2 of them. So it kind of moves with you as you grow with the hobby, and you can just add more units to it as well. So that is one of the reasons why I think that this 50 watt range is great for both beginners, but also those grids we talked about, which is like end game reefing as well. And why this range is actually uniquely well. But one of the things you get out of the 50 watts too is most of the time you're running them near full. So you're getting all the power, you're using it all, and it isn't going to waste.
So what about those 90 watts? That's kind of the middle of the road for the wattage we're talking about. And the 90 watts include a lot of these very popular lights, almost like the sweet spot for the output of wattage in like the XR15s, the Kessil A360s, the Hydra 32s. These are all lights that are in that 90 watt range. They do really, really well on their own in like a 60 gallon 24 by 24 inch cube that can get the job done for you. But also, instead of like 6 or 8 of these AI primes over a larger tank, I can almost cut that in half and use like less, like 3 or 4, and get the same even coverage and distribution.
So one of the reasons it's probably a sweet spot for a lot of people versus something like the AI Prime here is because I can probably use 4 of these rather than 8 of these, and while the price might be the same, I don't have 8 cords.
Right.
I don't have to mount 8 lights. Visually, aesthetically, on top of the tank, it just looks better. So something like 4 of the XR15s or 4 of the Kessil A360s or the 32s, a way more common option, probably why that's like that sweet spot of power. Again, in those ranges, you're probably for an SPS tank, really running them pretty close to max, at least in that 75% range, so you're not wasting a lot of money. So next up is that 150 watt range, give or take 10 watts in one direction or another. This is your Hydra 64s, this is your XR 30s. Now in this case, really, I think you're looking for an option where you're really looking for punch, man. In my case, I would say that 2 things actually. I want limited cords, and I don't care about shadows. I'm gonna get around that. I only want 2 lights. I only want 2 cords. I just really don't want to have a advanced mounting apparatus on top of the tank. And I'm just okay with the fact that there will be some shadows in this case because it's probably a mixed tank, in that case. But also, if I got a deep tank and I'm really looking to get punch down further, well, higher wattage. I will say though, it's probably not the most popular option these days. A lot of people are gravitating to that multiple use of 90 watt range over the highest powered lights these days.
Yeah, so probably one of the reasons that is I might end up with a light in that 150 plus, almost 200 watt range, and then come to find that I need to turn it down to hit the par numbers, which means I'm buying wattage for wattage I'm not going to use. In which case I can just use multiples of these smaller 90 watts. So there are some instances where you would choose these higher wattage ones, and for some people they need them, but a lot more people are choosing that middle of the road.
I will say, if money is no object, you raise your hand if you know what that is, then something like the XR 30s turned sideways, front to back, and 4 of them will give even better coverage. And if you're running them down at, even 30 or 40%, the longevity of the light at running at that low is probably really long. So, there's some trade-offs here. If money is no object, having a larger form factor light, you get some benefits out of that. The next consideration might seem kind of like trivial, but actually, when I polled a bunch of people a while ago, they said it was one of the #1 things they consider with a light.
Yeah, so that consideration is the mounting options for the lights you're choosing. I mean, typically we get, one of 3 or 4 options, and that's a tank mount type situation where it clamps onto the glass and the light hangs over the top. You get a arm or leg type configuration where you've got 2 legs on either side of the tank and your lights go on a bar in between. And then you have the other option of hanging, or a hanging kit that's suspended from the ceiling of some sort, or coming over the back of the tank. So you kind of got to pick what works best for you, especially when it comes to like choosing like the tank clip mount ones. Some of you have Eurobris tanks that's not even an option.
So really pay attention to it, because there's definitely different levels of effort that people want to put into mounting them.
Yeah.
And just as a general rule of thumb, the bigger the light, the harder it is to mount. So your big T5 arrays are generally, need to be mounted from the ceiling or arms off of the wall. That includes often your T5 like LED hybrids. Yep. Some of those options, there are limited options. So look and see before you do it, because it might change, the way or the amount of effort you want to put into lighting the tanks. There are other options out there. I would say the most robust ones tend to have the most accessories attached to them. So not surprising that
4 or 5
like the
options.
Radion has the mounting arm that spans the entire tank and has legs. It also has an arm that comes over the back. Fits in the most applications. Also, the Kessil has a really nice mounting arm that actually the cords go through and come right over. So in this case, again, if I can create that multiple grid of intersecting lights, I can do it super clean with really small form factor lights and a mounting apparatus that just anybody could do in a matter of minutes. Sometimes it influences your decision. All right, the next consideration is near and dear to my heart because I actually care what the tank looks like. And it's Shimmer. It's different with all of these options.
Oh yeah, there's you can go all the way from 0 to no shimmer, something like the T5s, it's just not in there. And then you can go all the way to the other extreme end that has this super high contrast shimmer. A lot of people like Kessil A360X being one of the most shimmery and shimmer choice options out there.
Yeah, shimmery, brand new word. But yeah, so you can actually tell just by looking at the light in most cases what it's going to do. So shimmer is created by the single point of light refracting off of the ripples on the top of the water. You see it in the ocean from the sun. And you can actually see when I look at like a T5 light, there isn't really a single point of light.
It's a whole bar.
It's a big bar of soft diffused light that's really even, it blankets the whole tank in light, but doesn't create a single point that refracts off that very much. Sometimes you can see just a little bit, but I've heard it rephrased this way, that a T5 or a halide tank in the old world, or LED in this world, is like taking a piece of the reef and putting it in your house.
Yes.
The T5 tank is kind of like looking at a picture of a reef in your house, because there's no sense of movement other than the fish kind of look like they're just floating. It produces awesome results, but aesthetically kind of missing something for me. But there's other options out there. Another option I can tell you just by looking at it what it does, and I know this after the fact as well, is something like these XR15s and that frosted kind of diffused look.
Yeah, and you can find even other LEDs that have like a diffuser cover on them, or they have the LEDs spread out in like a diffused plate over the top of them. Philips Coral Care is another one that has a diffused like soft plate on the bottom of it. But what you can expect from that is not those hard shimmer lines from the single LEDs in the bright light hitting the water, but they're more muted. So you get this balance kind of in between the hard shimmer lines and caustic lines versus zero. It's kind of that in between.
I'll say it leans a little closer in most cases. The diffused or frosted approach to LEDs, a little closer to T5s than it does to the other applications like halides and undiffused LEDs. Now the other option is something you can see really easy. So this is a single point of light. All the LEDs are under one single lens, super, super bright, refracts off the water ripples, and creates the most shimmer in the tank. Now, this is closer to me and what I like, and this is a good point to say it probably isn't what Randy likes.
No, it's not. I like the middle of the road or much less shimmer than that. My favorite was a T5 with LED supplements, so I can get, you know, the more muted shimmer with just little hints of movement in there for me.
So my personal favorite goes back to that hybrid again, is where I'm taking this level of shimmer and then I'm muting it just a little bit with the T5s or even other LED strips, mutes that shimmer just a little bit and finds that happy ground for me. But there's also what they would call the other extreme end, the disco ball end of what we call a shimmer, where it actually looks more like TV static or like little ants running around your tank, often with actually little bits of color shooting all over the place. And I can tell you that you can see that just from the design. Yep. If you have a grid of LEDs that are exposed,
each with their own lens.
Specifically, even worse if they have their own lens, because it will focus that LED down in there. There's no diffusion and there's no frost to it. Well, you're probably going to see that staticky look to it. So you can just look at the design of the light, see all the individual lensed LEDs, and know you're going to get that kind of staticky disco effect in the tank.
But you can kind of combat that by raising it a little higher to allow it more room to blend those LEDs together.
Sometimes you can do it, but now if I've raised it up, there's an optimal height for the lens.
Yeah, true.
And so I can change the shimmer, but now I've ruined the optimal height for the lens. I'm either getting hot spots in the tank or I'm spilling tons of light into the room unnecessarily.
Yeah.
So I don't know, for me, some of the best designs don't have individual LEDs under individual lenses because aesthetically, it's just not perfect for me. All right, the next consideration is control. We're talking sliders, knobs, how you control these lights, and it might be one of the most important factors of choosing the right light, but not for the reason that you think.
Yeah, so I mean, we talk about controls. You could have controls for on and off functionality, setting your daylight photo period, in which case, one of the easiest ways that's been done for years is the plug and play digital timer. Turn this thing on for 9 hours, turn it off, and I just basically have to plug it in and walk away. Lighting is solved. And there's other options that kind of do the same thing, but you know, we're also talking about controls of, do you get all of the keys to every single color? Do you have a knob, or do you have a setting that the manufacturer's given to you so you can't mess the thing up? And all of those really should come into consideration, some of the best being ones that you really don't have to think super hard about it.
Unless you happen to be a marine biologist and you understand the perfect spectrum, you have the ability to measure it, and you really know what you're doing when you're flipping those switches, it's really not a toy. This is like the primary source of energy for an organism that's like relying on you to do this right. And so I think the reason that this has shifted is because originally it was like, I want more phone apps, I want more control, I want more sliders, I'm trying to create the perfect like light in my tank. And now it's shifted actually all the way to the other spectrum. Take away the options. I want options that work. I want to be able to set this thing up right out of the box. I think Kessil was probably first to do that, where it doesn't really matter, using that Kessil logic, where I turn the color, all of them were tuned to be the right spectrum, meaning I have that primary blue spectrum and I'm adding in white just for visual appeal, and I really can't screw this up. I don't think you could really go out of your way to mess that up. But options like the Radion.
Yeah, so and now we're coming out with options that either have a template for you that you can just schedule and then set your overall intensity to the par ranges you want, and then you walk away. But even like the Radion Blue, this one, when this came out, the array of LEDs is designed so that you can run them all at 100% and then adjust all of them in the point intensity to the par levels that you're looking for in your tank, and now I don't have to mess with, is that enough green, is that enough blue? It's already distributed in the amount of LEDs they put in there to be optimal. I just adjust for par.
Yeah, designed to be run at 100% everything,
yeah,
and then just bring them all down evenly using the little intensity slider to get to the right par number. So a lot easier, and also as we start to get a better understanding of the amount of par that is required to do this and the optimal mounting heights, some of them are starting to give recommendations on how many you need and really where to set them. So we're seeing more and more information. For me, probably the leaders of that pack is actually being the Kessil Logic, as well as the Radion, because Radion actually tested that spectrum they have inside of a lot of aquaculture facilities to be able to develop one that grows corals the best, and then shared it with you so that you can actually emulate what other people are doing in the professional end of aquatics and achieve the same results. Another consideration here that's really unique actually to the Kessil is the ability to swap lenses. It's, I think, the only light out there where you can actually change the optimal height by popping on a little lens.
Yeah, so we're talking about making a wide angle floodlight, around 130 degree wide angle, and now putting on that narrow reflector to, say 55 or 90 degrees, and now that changes, like I've just turned this light that has an optimal mounting height at 8 inches to an optimal mounting height at like 12 inches or 14 inches, where I'm still getting the same par and the same distribution. I just changed the dynamics so that I mount it higher.
Yeah, so what that means is, what if I happen to like certain aspects of that light? Well, if you didn't use the lens, then I guess at 8 inches is where you're kind of stuck for optimal height. But this is one of the only options where I can raise the light up, be it my hood or any other need, and then change that optics using the lens. And then I can also change it again to get that extra depth if I wanted. It is going to create a little bit of a hot spot towards the top, but that's kind of the nature of trying to get light down to the bottom and focusing it. But get different options using the lens swap, and that's pretty unique to the Kessil. All right, maybe the most fun part of today is there are some go-to lighting sources that we pick almost every time or really appreciate up-and-comers. Things that we will do on our own tanks. What are they?
Yeah, my go-to light has always been T5, but now we're seeing that these LED strips can actually outperform T5s. So right now I'm interested in going into these and using these LED strips as a single fixture to get that large, soft, diffused lighting, but I am very excited about these panels of LEDs that are up and coming. More and more of them are being produced. I can't wait to see the results on them, and I'll probably end up over there at some point in time.
So Randy excited about the future. I'm still stuck in the past. My go-to, if you've watched any video from us, you already know, is the Kessil single point of wide angle floodlight. Creates a shimmer that I like. Then add the fill light with the T5s. The easiest way to achieve that for yourself is using these aquatic light fixtures, and you just mount it right in the middle. Any light actually you can use. But again, you can also do like a retrofit kit like the tank that we have built behind me. But over and over and over again, I see the most visually appealing tanks for me and the best, most consistent results from combining those two wide angle floodlight technologies with the fill light to produce it. So if you're interested in any of the things that we talked about today, you can check out over here at bulkresupply.com, check out the lighting category. But if you really want to master it, we have a series for that too.
Yeah, regardless of what light you choose, even ones we may not have mentioned today, in this Master Your Lighting series right over here, you can find out the answers.
Everything you ever wanted to know about using these tools to the best effect.